Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for another edition of Know Your Enemy. We're hanging out tonight, as always. I am your deputy editor and host, Michael Beck, hanging out not with Geoffrey Benedict tonight. We got a sub in, Mr. Bryan Anthony Davis, the bad one. Bryan, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I have a lot more hair than Geoffrey, but I don't have the knowledge that he has. So I feel like I'm going to try to overcompensate, but at least I've got the grass on the field up here.
People will be distracted by your dashingly good looks, Bryan. I'm sure we'll make it through on this one.
I'm not going to lie to you. Tiger Beat, it keeps on calling me. I don't even know if that's still a thing, but you don't even know what that is. You were born in the 90s, but Tiger Beat was the thing back in the 70s and 80s, like Ralph Macchio, all those teen heartthrobs. I know I'm 48, but I could be that teen heartthrob again.
Dreams do come true. We also have a special guest tonight from Bleeding Green Nation, the editor of Bleeding Green, Mr. Brandon Gowton. Brandon, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great, guys. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, it is our pleasure. Right off the top here, just super general about your Philadelphia Eagles. A bit of a slow-ish start out of the gate, starting to pick up. Obviously, a couple losses, a tie and a win. That's a great bell curve right there, heading in the right direction. Still sitting atop the NFC East, though. What's kind of the vibe on this whole team? How is kind of Eagles Nation kind of reacting to this start?
Yeah, so I think there's two different answers here. Like, there's my perspective, and then there's Eagles fans at large. I think Eagles fans at large, I'll start with that, are feeling more optimistic, about the win against the 49ers. For as banged up as they were, it's still a team that went to the Super Bowl last year in the NFC. And so I think people are buying into that a little bit. I don't think they think the season is totally saved, but there's more hope for sure than there was heading into week 4. Carson Wentz had his best game, which is a very low bar, but he played well enough to help the team win. Doug Peterson, I think, did some good things. Jim Schwartz has the defense playing well. The Eagles defensive line, I believe, is like 12 sacks and 33 quarterback hits in the last couple games here. So they're really turning it on. So there are signs for optimism. To me, I'm not buying in at all. I mean, they beat up a very injured 49ers team that was starting Nick Mullins and had to bench him. So they still have to show me a lot before I'm really fully buying back into them. But I think in general, people kind of have, a little bit more hope than they did heading into week 4.
Awesome. With this not being the NFC East that we're used to seeing, especially with Dallas struggling, is there more optimism, or are you waiting for Dallas to rear their ugly head again and come back to prominence? Because right now they have been probably the most disappointing team in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cowboys should still be favored, and I think most people consider them the favorites, even though the Eagles are ahead right now, just because for as bad as that defense has been, I think the assumption is they can't continue to be this bad on defense, even if they just kind of end up being kind of mediocre or poor instead of like historically the worst defense in the NFL, one of them. I think, between that and the offense there, obviously that's been clicking for them. Whereas the Eagles, I just, again, they still have a lot to prove. And I guess for me, when you look at the NFC East, and the Eagles could win it, and that's great in the short term. I think it could be won at something like 6-9-1 or 7-8-1, which is really sad. But I think my concern with the Eagles here is that I don't really know that winning the division with such a poor record, kind of just struggling to get there, but kind of winning it by default, is really a great thing for the long-term health of the franchise. I think, those two ugly losses we saw, and then really even playing really bad enough to win, or to lose rather, against the Bengals, like there's long-term concerns here about Carson Wentz, about Howie Roseman, the Eagles general manager. So it'd be kind of like a false positive almost to me if they really kind of just don't even look that good and win the NFC East by default. So I think that's where it's at right now. It's kind of a weird thing to say, that it wouldn't be the best thing to win a division, but I think that's kind of the spot they could be in.
Interesting. Now, I have a couple thoughts on Wentz that I want to ask you, but I want to flip just over to Bryan here. The Steelers 3-0 start, obviously kind of a surprise bye week. Ben Roethlisberger shared some thoughts earlier on that topic earlier today. Is there any kind of concern that this team can kind of lose its momentum heading into this their fourth game of the season?
There's always that concern, but if they do, then they are not the team that we think they are. They are not the team that Ben Roethlisberger came back to after a year off. That would mean to me that they do not have the heart of a champion if they will let this distract them. Look, we talked about this all week. I talked about it all week because I remember 2001. And 2001 was a team that got blown out in week 1 of the NFL season against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Week 2, September 11th happened. It was a tragedy for our entire country. They did not play at all that week. Nobody played in the NFL that week. They took it all off. The next week, because there was only 31 teams, you got to remember, this was 2 years after the Cleveland Browns came back as the 31st team, and 1 year away from the Houston Texans coming to the league. So every week there was a team on a bye, including week 1, week 17. So what happened, the Steelers' bye just happened to be week 3. So they had a 3-week bye basically at the beginning of the season, had to play 15 straight games and 2 in the playoffs. So they played 17 straight games and they went 14-3 down that stretch. And that was with Cordell Stewart as your quarterback. So what I'm saying here, this team, if they're who we think they are, should not struggle. Like Mike Tomlin said, we don't care about a bye. And they don't. I realize what Ben Roethlisberger said, and he's saying this as a team leader. This is also a message to the guys. I've got your back, but don't read anything into it. They're prepared to come into this game, and if they don't, it's going to be a major disappointment.
No kidding. Now, speaking of quarterbacks, Carson Wentz, down to Brandon here on this one. Carson Wentz throwing 7 interceptions through the first 4 games. I think a couple years back he had 7 in an entire season, something along those lines. Is there some sort of like major kind of concern, some sort of red lights going off here on this kind of start for the Eagles starting quarterback?
There should be. I mean, it's been really bad. I mean, I was going through it today, and I wrote an article. I started writing an article about Dwayne Haskins getting benched, because he's in the NFC East. So thought I'd highlight that on Bleeding Green Nation. And I was like, wait a minute here. Like, let me look at a comparison of the stats between Dwayne Haskins and Carson Wentz. And Carson Wentz is worse in completion percentage, worse in yards per attempt, worse in passer rating, worse in Football Outsiders metrics, DER and DVOA. He's worse in PF, or actually Haskins is one better in PFF grade, but they're right there at the bottom. So he's playing terribly right now. And, a lot of people are kind of like, okay, he had his best game against the 49ers, but that was such a low bar. And he really didn't even play all that well. He had a really good touchdown pass to Travis Fulgam, 42-yarder, which ended up being the go-ahead touchdown and the decider. But yeah, I mean, that's okay. That's one nice throw. There's still a lot of accuracy issues in there. He is doing a good job of being more mobile than he usually is. But you're not going to win the whole season like that. I mean, eventually he's going to have to make plays with his arm, and he did just enough to beat the 49ers, but I just don't think that's going to cut it most weeks. So he has to play a lot better. And until I see it happen, I'm not just going to assume it right now. I know Carson Wentz has this track record of being a good quarterback. I would think he is going to get somewhat better, maybe not this bad, but I don't know if it's also going to jump up to, where ideally he would be, like a top 10 quarterback. I'm not going to believe that until I see it.
Right. Now, on the Steelers side of things, Ben Roethlisberger, obviously the story of our kind of offseason was his elbow, what it would look like when he was coming back in. And now he's kind of had this this kind of pseudo break, and he's got to go on a 13-game run. Now, Brian, do you have any concern that Ben will kind of wear out through these 13 games, and could that become an issue come playoff time?
It could always be an issue. It really depends how he has healed. Now, we have talked about the fact that, this injury first started when he was a rookie, because with all of those tears, the first one happened and he played with that for about 13, 14 years, and then the rest went. So if it's repaired and he's better than ever, and a lot of people are still considering his arm pretty strong. I mean, you're seeing him overthrow a lot of receivers on the deep ball. The big concern right now is getting that deep ball back into prominence with this team. Really making sure that that's tight and connecting is what I'm really trying to say. But I have not really had any questions about his arm strength, so I'm really not worried about it wearing out. I'm just worried about Ben having to go back to being a gunslinger. If he has to go back to being a gunslinger, then you're going to see a lot of interceptions. Right now, I'm going to knock on wood, knock on anything I could find to say 7 against 1 as far as touchdowns and interceptions. It's pretty phenomenal for Ben Roethlisberger. And so this is something that we're not used to as well. And another thing to remember about Ben Roethlisberger, the last time we saw him in a full season, what was he trying to do? He threw a lot of interceptions. He threw 16 interceptions. Why? Because he had a receiver, a diva wide receiver that was going to threaten not to come to work the next day, throw a Gatorade container, just go completely crazy if he was not involved in every throw. And all of those interceptions, 13 of those 16 interceptions were passes that were targeted for Antonio Brown. Ben does not need to do that this year. Ben is fortunate to have a young receiving crew that's hungry, that are listening to what he's saying, that are being guided by Ben, and are willing to work as a team. You're seeing that with Juju Smith-Schuster, who's the leader of those receivers, and he's very unselfish. He was the leading receiver in the last game against the Houston Texans with, I believe, 46 yards. I know it was under 50. And the thing about that is he was thrilled with the win. You would have not seen that before with Antonio Brown if the balls were going to another player. So with Deontay Johnson, with Chase Claypool and James Washington, along with Juju and the 2 tight ends, Ben has so many weapons. So I'm thrilled with what's going on here, and I'm not as worried about Ben.
Now, on that note, Brandon, how does this Philadelphia Eagles team kind of stop a Ben Roethlisberger-led Pittsburgh Steelers offense?
Yeah, so the defense, like I said, is looking good, or at least better for the Eagles. I mean, they had their worst game in week 2 against the Rams, where the Rams came out, and I believe they scored touchdowns and with ease on their first 3 drives. I mean, they just methodically moved down the field. It looked like a practice setting, like where the Rams were basically supposed to just dominate, and the defense was supposed to just take their lumps. I mean, it was really bad. But since then, I think they've kind of hunkered down a little bit. You know, Jim Schwartz is a good defensive coordinator. For all the ire he draws from Eagles fans, and he can be frustrating. I'm not saying he's perfect, but when you look at his track record, I mean, heading into this season, since 2016, Jim Schwartz's defense was only allowing the 6th fewest points in the NFL, first fewest at home. He has a track record here. And so I think, when you look at how the Eagles were able to beat the 49ers, I mean, and really tie against the Bengals, it was because they were able to beat up on those quarterbacks. I mean, again, 33 quarterback hits in 2 games. I know the Steelers generate a lot of pressure. They're actually the best in the NFL at it, according to Pro Football Focus. But the Eagles are really coming on here with their defensive line. And they invested a lot of money and resources into that line. So it's only right that unit would start producing like they should be. And yeah, so I think that's really the key there. I mean, it's about generating pressure up front. They kind of have to just dominate the line of scrimmage. And that's really going to give them their best chance to succeed. And obviously, too, you're hoping for the turnovers, because that was really big in this 49ers game. Prior to last week in week 4, the Eagles hadn't forced a turnover since week 17 of 2019. So obviously, kind of being able to use that pass rush, not only get sacks, but there was a big play in that 49ers game where Jannard Avery was able to hit Nick Mullins and force an interception. That kind of really swung the momentum of that game. And they're going to need more plays like that moving forward.
Now, there's another quarterback in this matchup, too, that I think is worth noting for the Eagles, Brandon. Jalen Hurts in this one. It's kind of a whole another animal. I know he's been used kind of as a gadget player a little bit. How has he kind of been used in this Eagles offense, and what should Steelers fans kind of expect when he's on the field?
Yeah, it's been a small package so far. It hasn't been like this, this really big thing. They kind of bring him in here and there. Hasn't really been super successful, honestly. There hasn't really been a lot of fruit born out of that. Haven't really even seen him throw the ball yet, so we've yet to see that integrate into the offense. The Eagles did try to do a double pass with him against the 49ers last week, but they kind of just sniffed it out, and it ended up being Hurts, taking off for a 5-yard run instead. So you'll see that mixed in there for sure. It'll be interesting to see maybe if they go to it more because of the Steelers pass rush is so good and the Eagles have some offensive line issues, maybe they're going to look to get a little bit more creative with that and pick their spots. But yeah, it's not something I think that is this lethal weapon by any means, and teams should really be afraid of yet. It's just something you're probably going to notice for like 3 to 5 plays, if that much, on Sunday.
Yeah. Now, Brian, what do you kind of have to worry about when you're playing up against a gadget player of sorts like Hurts, that kind of change of pace type guy? What do the Steelers have to kind of do to kind of limit some big plays from an unlikely source?
Notice when he's on the field is the number one thing. I guess that's elementary. But, for me, it's just don't get caught with your pants down. When he's on the field, you know that he's not going, if he's there for a as a decoy, then he's not going to be a decoy for long. They're not going to waste time putting him out there to just not go to him. So you need to pay attention to him. You need to, I'm sure that they've been working on practice with about Jalen Hurts. I'm sure they've had Josh Dobbs in that situation with his speed. They've probably had him working out with the team as well. And think about it. They've had extra time to work on the Philadelphia Eagles, because last week when they found out that there was going to be no game, they still had practice. So they've already implemented that. They kind of have a head start on this. And the brain trust is just thinking about the possibility of Jalen Hurts coming in and you're wrecking some things on at least one play. So they're going to be ready for it. They're going to be thinking about it, but you just can't lose sight of that and get caught. You don't want those pants around the ankle, man, you're in trouble.
It's true. Now, speaking of offensive line and some injuries, the Eagles have really been slammed, Brandon. Now, five names of guys that have were projected starters or had started on the Eagles line have spent some time on the IR or just flat out just not going to be healthy to go in this one. Can you break down what's kind of going on there and how the Eagles are going to be able to kind of stave off the Steelers' pass rush?
Yeah, so I'm like thinking about it in my head here, and I'll make sure I have it all right because it's a lot to keep track of. Okay, so it's like June earlier this year. They lose their starting Pro Bowl right guard Brandon Brooks for the season, Achilles tear, really unfortunate. Playing at a high level for a couple of years now. Then Lane Johnson goes down in training camp. He misses like several weeks. We find out he had ankle surgery in like August. He missed some time at the beginning of the season. 2019 first-round pick Andre Dillard suffered a biceps injury in practice and training camp one day. That's your starting left tackle out for the season. So Jason Peters, who was originally re-signed to play right guard in place of Brooks, goes back over to left tackle after he demands a raise, and the team gives him a raise. He gets hurt unexpectedly. Didn't even know he had suffered an injury that was going to put him on IR the day before the 49ers game. So now you have a guy named Jordan Milada who had never even played a single snap of football in his life until like 3 years ago in the preseason. He had been a rugby league football player in Australia. He comes in, he does pretty well against the 49ers, especially in his first start. So he's out there at left tackle. At left guard, the Eagles have a former undrafted rookie free agent named Nate Herbig starting for them. And he's done some good things, but, again, not an ideal starter. Jason Kelce is obviously an all-pro player. I think he's made all-pro 3 years now, so very good player there. He's a little banged up, though, so that's not great. At right guard, you have Matt Pryor, who was a guy the Eagles basically did not want to play at all unless they have to, so not ideal. And then at right tackle, again, I mentioned Lane Johnson. He was kind of in and out of the lineup last week because he's still dealing with that ankle injury. Doug Peterson admitted it's going to be a nagging issue for him all season when he's healthy. He's one of the best tackles, not just right tackles, just offensive tackles, period, in the game. But he's not healthy right now, and that means Jack Driscoll, who is a fourth-round rookie that the Eagles have, he's probably going to get some snaps. Lane might not be able to play the whole game, so it's not ideal right now. Now, what's working in the Eagles' favor is they have a very good offensive line coach in Jeff Stoutland, and he kind of takes all that and he figures it out and he finds a way to make it work. And I think a lot of people might, from afar, look at Carson Wentz and see him struggling and think it's just the offensive line. It's really not. He's had time. It's not perfect. yes, but he's had ample time to throw at moments, and he just hasn't really made those throws count. So I think the offensive line is definitely in for their biggest test against this Steelers defense, and it's very concerning. But I don't think it's going to be a total disaster just because I've seen Jeff Stoutland before kind of make the most out of not the most to work with.
Now, Brandon, I want to come right back at you with another question, because Jason Peters, the story here, it seems like there's a lot going on, a whole lot more than meets the eye. Obviously, that kind of injury seemed like he was fine after the last game, goes in IR kind of randomly. Does he want to be there? Like, what's kind of the whole deal with Jason Peters? And is he done for the season, really?
I don't think he's done for the season in terms of just the severity of his injury, but I mean, he might be done for his career in terms of if Jordan Milada continues to play well. I mean, he should be the guy. I mean, maybe you put Jason Peters back in at right guard, or again, he was going to originally play with Brooks out because they probably might like Peters there more than Pryor. So it's possible he comes back in that role. But yeah, I think the thing with Peters that other people outside of Philly, and maybe some people even in Philly, don't necessarily fully understand is he has like unparalleled clout for a player. There's a story about how every year the Eagles do weigh-ins, and every single player has to do it. They take your weight, their height. Jason Peters doesn't step on the scale. He tells you how much he weighs, and that's kind of how it goes. I mean, he's been around here, he's been around the league for a long time. He just has a lot of clout. He's even said, and this is I can never get over this. He has said he has a relationship with Eagles owner Geoffrey that they are best friends. You don't see a lot of players being best friends with these like billionaire owners. That's just not a common dynamic at all. So yeah, it's a weird, strange situation. And again, I said like he literally demanded a raise to pay left tackle, and they paid it to him. So Jason Peters is a very unique player in both talent and how good he is at his prime, not so much anymore, but also how he's treated.
Yeah, I would assume being best friends with the owner is probably an easy way to get a decent raise. Maybe that's what I got to do in my world. But Brian, getting back to the football stuff, the Steelers D-line, obviously their front seven, defense as a whole, really has been one of the best attacking groups in football. Obviously, looking across at a weakened line, weakened receiving core, and a Carson Wentz that's been struggling. Do you think this is a week that we could see some big time kind of gaudy sack numbers, or is this going to be one of those typical Steeler trap games where for whatever reason they just can't seem to get home?
You know what? I'm really careful when projecting sacks. On the preview tomorrow night, I'm sure Jeff and Dave will be predicting so many sacks. We'll do the over-under on that. For some reason, I always like to take the under, because just when you think that they're going to go ahead and attack like crazy, you run into a quarterback that is able to elude some pressure. Now, when he came into the league, 16, 17, please, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but Carson Wentz was very good at eluding the rush and getting out of trouble. I don't know where his numbers were the last few years as far as that goes. I don't know if he's taken a little bit of a back seat, but with that being said, he still can get out of trouble in my mind, and they've got to be careful. They don't want to be too overconfident. But this Steeler front seven is fantastic. It is the strength of their team. You know that. I worry about the Sports Illustrated jinx because TJ Watt was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So that always scares the heck out of me because I'm that superstitious fool. But, the thing about the Steelers, when it comes to rushing the passer, if Bud Dupree's not going to kill you, TJ Watt's going to. If those two aren't going to kill you, Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt are going to be in your face. And now with Javon Hargrave going to the Philadelphia Eagles, which he was fantastic here in Pittsburgh, they have not missed a beat, and I'm still shocked that Tyson Alualu has come in and played so well. So this front seven is playing spectacular, but they're going to be cognizant of Carson Wentz being able to get out of some trouble and maybe turn a 3rd and 8 into a first down. They've got to make sure that they're checking him on that.
Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't ask about our old buddy Javon Hargrave. Brandon, how's Hargrave looked through some playing time in this early season?
Yeah, so he had an injury before even like training camp really started. So he missed basically off camp. He missed the first couple games, wasn't ready to play right away. He had a pectoral injury, and then he had a hamstring injury on top of that. So just bad luck for him to start with. And then I think the first few games he had here, he didn't even like log a stat, so that wasn't the best thing. But I think he was a little bit more productive than that showed. He was getting some pressures, PFF charts those. I think he finally got in the stat sheet. I believe he had a half a sack against the 49ers. Saw him being a little bit more disruptive in there. So, yeah, I mean, that was a big signing for the Eagles. That was like their premier free agent addition that they made this offseason. So definitely, and interesting too, because the Eagles already have Fletcher Cox, who is like one of the best defensive tackles in the league and one of the most highest paid. And they also brought in Malik Jackson last year, who was like their big free agent addition signing last year. So it's kind of weird when they signed Hargrave because like, wow, you're going to add another kind of starting caliber, big money defensive tackle in here. And, the thought with that is like, okay, like they better all be pretty productive if you're paying this big money. Like they better be generating a lot of interior pass rush. And, these past couple of weeks, they have been able to do that. So the investment is looking more worth it now. And I think Hargrave, as he can kind of continue to get further removed from this injury, he could have a bigger impact. And I'm sure he's going to be super hyped up for this game. I'm sure he wants to make some big plays against his former team and really stand out. So it'll be interesting to watch him this week.
Now, Brandon, I was thinking about coming back right to you on this one. Injuries has kind of been the theme so far of our conversation. Obviously, the Eagles receiving core has been hit by it pretty hard as well. Jalen Reagor, Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Dallas Goedert. Where's this offense kind of coming from now? And can some of the blame, do you think, can be taken off of Carson Wentz's shoulders when you look at the guys that he's throwing at?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent of where like Carson Wentz shouldn't be expected to be like the MVP or even like a top 5 quarterback right now. But I don't think it's, enough blame to take off him to where he should be this bad. It should be somewhere in between. Like if he was looking mediocre, okay, then fine. Like maybe he's not looking awesome because everything else around him isn't great. But I think a big issue is that Carson Wentz is simply missing throws. Like he has time to throw, receiver is open, and the ball is just not even in the vicinity where the receiver can make a play. I mean, that's just on the quarterback at some point. But going back to the receiver position at large, Alshon Jeffrey could potentially be back this week. We don't know that for sure. He's still limited in practice. They might bring him back. Deshaun Jackson is still dealing with a hamstring issue. He missed practice and then the game in week 4. He's limited today on Wednesday, so maybe he'll be able to go. But even if he is, like it's just kind of a question of when's he going to get hurt again because he hasn't been able to stay healthy since the Eagles have really brought him back. So those guys kind of don't know for sure. Travis Fulgam, who was a name and a guy you probably never heard of before, except for him catching a touchdown pass against the 49ers. He could be in for a role again with him making that play. Maybe the Eagles see something in him that they like. They have a guy they drafted in the second round last year named J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who is basically useless and is effectively like a blocking receiver for them. So I'm not counting on him to do anything big. And if he does, then I look like a fool. Greg Ward they have is basically just a slot guy. Zach Ertz has really not had the year that you would expect from him, especially he comes in here, he's talking about how he wants a new contract. Well, and he hasn't really been doing anything so far to really justify that. Now, he's still a very good player, so maybe we'll see him turn it on at some point, but, it hasn't been there to this point, and obviously defenses are going to try to key in on him and take him away because that's Carson Wentz's security blanket. So, yeah, it's not an ideal situation by any means, but sometimes – there's a thought that Carson Wentz actually plays better when he has like less weapons to work with. That's what we saw down the stretch last year in 2019, where like everyone's hurt. He's throwing to Greg Ward. He's throwing to Deontay Burnett. He's throwing to Robert Davis, who isn't even in the NFL anymore. He's throwing to all these no-name practice squad guys. And for some reason, it seems like those guys are hungrier for the opportunity. And Carson Wentz is almost like he knows that like he really has to carry them and make it work somehow. So it's not going to be pretty. This Eagles offense is not in a good state right now. They're going up against a very tough Steelers defense. I'm under no impression that the Eagles are going to be able to, easily move the ball or score on the Steelers team. It's going to be really tough.
Awesome. Now, I think we're going to, if you're listening on our podcast platform, we're going to flip over to part 2. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, just hang tight. But for more great conversation with Brandon Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation, make sure to flip over to part 2 if you're listening on our podcast side. Ladies and gentlemen, you are still watching Behind the Steel Curtain. Know your enemy for Week 5, Pittsburgh Steelers versus Philadelphia Eagles. I am Michael Beck, joined this week with Bryan Anthony Davis and Brandon Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation. Bryan, we ended part 1 just kind of talking about the Eagles receivers and their kind of injury problems. On the flip side of that, on the Steelers defense, our secondary was kind of hyped to be one of those kind of top 5 units coming into this season. So far, I haven't really done anything all that flashy. And in some instances, people could say have kind of been possibly the weak spot on this defense. Do you think they can kind of return to form of the 2019 Steelers secondary and could potentially Minkah Fitzpatrick have a bigger impact in this game?
I actually think Minkah Fitzpatrick is having an impact on the season, and I feel like it's a positive impact. But he's doing different things than he did last year. Remember, you don't have Mark Barron in there. You're seeing him cheat up a little bit. You're seeing a lot out of him, and it's not as flashy as it was last year. But remember, teams are not attacking. If you look at the last 8 games of last season, he didn't have interceptions in that game, but they also threw his way twice in the last 8 games. Because they remember the 5 interceptions in the 6 games before that for the Steelers since when he came over in week 3. So I'm not as concerned about Minkah Fitzpatrick and the defensive backs as a whole. I think that they're just getting started. I think the rust is coming off. I remember I always talk about the first 3 weeks of the season, especially with COVID being in the equation this year as their preseason. Their preseason was supposed to be over at the end of week 3. So the rust is off. It's time for them to get started. They have been left on an island a little bit, if you ask me as well, because you have teams you have the running backs that they have faced in the first 3 games. David Johnson, we know all about him, Pro Bowler. Melvin Gordon, former Pro Bowler. Saquon Barkley, all-world when he's healthy. And they've limited those guys. They completely limited those players because they game planned around it. And when you have your front 7 paying all that attention to those players, then those guys in the secondary are going to be left all alone to fend for themselves, and teams feasted on it. They're going to get yards. Every NFL team is going to get yards. But the Steelers are not letting you get those yards rushing the football. Where you're getting the yards is passing the ball. And my biggest concern about the Steelers playing the Eagles this week, and Brandon already talked about Zach Ertz, but I'm more concerned about Carson Wentz throwing the ball to his running backs because the Steelers get torched on that. As bad of a game that Saquon Barkley had against the Steelers in week 1, he was pretty good at catching the ball out of the backfield. And the Steelers get caught with their pants down when that happens as well.
Now, Brandon, with our secondary or kind of defense as a whole, how do you think the Eagles need to attack this unit? Where's kind of the weak spots? And what does this kind of offense have to do in order to move the ball against the defense?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's in such a not a good shape that the options really aren't abundant. I really think they almost have to play, and I hate that I'm saying this because for too long now, the Eagles have played this station to station, dink and dunk down the field. It takes like 16 plays, and sometimes they have to settle for 3 points, and it's just like excruciatingly boring to watch. It is a terrible aesthetic, but they might have to really do that to win this game. I mean, they might have to just kind of go on these drives, not make mistakes. Obviously, and Carson Wentz has obviously made a lot of those. He already has 7 interceptions. He's thrown only 7 interceptions each the last 3 seasons, so really not a good start for him in that regard. Just has not been good. And there's been accuracy issues in there. There's been decision-making issues. So you can't turn the ball over. You almost have to be a little bit conservative. You have to pick your spots with those kind of shots down the field like they did against the 49ers. It would be great to get Miles Sanders involved in the passing game, as Bryan kind of talked about there. Obviously, a Pittsburgh area native, Miles Sanders, and we brought up Saquon Barkley also, is back up at Penn State. Miles Sanders was basically their best deep threat last year after Deshaun got hurt. after the first game. So if they can kind of get him a little bit more involved, he was there for some big plays against the Bengals. It was just that Carson Wentz overthrew him. Miles Sanders could have had at least one touchdown, another big play down the field. So I definitely think that is something they will be looking to do. If the Steelers are going to have issues with that, because Sanders kind of hasn't really had that major game yet. And I think it's kind of time for them to kind of wake up and be like, hey, let's get this guy the ball. Let's force feed it to him. Let's not only in the running game, but let's see if he can make some plays in the passing game. So it's not going to be pretty. Again, there's no way where they're just, moving up and down the field all day against this Steelers offense, but maybe they try to get the ball out quick and negate that Steelers pass rush. And again, try to get it to Sanders and see if he can kind of make things happen.
Now, Brandon, on that offensive side, of course, Zach Ertz is someone we touched on a little bit earlier. He, from everything that I've kind of seen, has kind of, not, I guess in a sense, been at odds with the organization, wanting more targets, wanting a new contract. Obviously, Dallas Goedert getting injured. He was someone that early in the season, I do believe was getting targeted more than Zach Ertz even was. With him going down, do you kind of expect Zach Ertz, his production to kind of increase? And do you think this kind of issue with Zach Ertz and the organization kind of fizzles out with this kind of forced increase in production in the offense?
Yeah, I mean, he should, just because, Goddard isn't there, and Goddard was the Eagles' leading receiver, before he got hurt here. So, but then again, you look at Ertz's performance last week, and he was like 3 for 4 for like 9 or 11. It was just like incredibly unproductive and not what we usually see. And part of the problem there is like, okay, they can say he's being doubled or taken away, but guess what? Like, the Eagles were playing the 49ers, and George Kittle was like clearly their biggest weapon, and they were trying to double him and do a lot of things on him. And George Kittle still had like 186 yards and 15 receptions and a touchdown too. So, Ertz just clearly isn't that kind of same player. He's very good. I'm not trying to say he's bad, but he's just not that elite level, especially like not a guy who's going to make plays after the catch. It's not his game at all. His game is route running. He knows how to get open. He knows how to work leverage, and he's reliable, obviously, and that's why Carson Wentz loves to throw to him so much. So, I would think they try to look to get him more involved, because he has not been involved to where probably he wants to be, and then where to obviously the team wants to be as well. And in going forward with the contract thing, it's really an interesting situation, because Ertz wants this new deal, but he has 2 years left on his contract, and the Eagles shouldn't really be in a rush to pay him when you have a young, cheap, affordable tight end in Dallas Goedert who could replace him. So it's an interesting dynamic. And again, for Ertz, I said it earlier in the show, but if he's going to come in and demand this new contract, well, he has to play up to it too. And he's really not doing that right now. He's underperforming. So you would think he would have a bigger role with Goddard out and him kind of needing to step it up. But I mean, he's going to have to prove it. He's going to have to prove that he can still be that guy for this team, because recently it really hasn't been the case. He made a big catch in that Bengals game late in the game. So we know Zach Ertz is still in there, but let's see it. Let's see the offense run through him.
Now, Brian, in the last couple of years, the Steelers kind of struggle in the slot and against kind of big body receivers, tight ends. Do you foresee the Steelers having some sort of issues with the Zach Ertz this week? And why exactly do they struggle with these bigger type guys?
I still do think that they're going to struggle. With all due respect to what Brandon's saying, we have seen guys like this torch this team a lot, especially a bigger receiver, and that is one of the Steelers' Achilles heels on defense. You're going to see Mr. Edmonds, Terrell Edmonds, working up, trying to work on him. You're not going to have Vince Williams on the field as much as it was alluded to on the live chat. If they're not running the ball, he's our best run defender. But as far as that goes, he is a liability in pass coverage. And Devin Bush, for as fantastic as he's been against the run, against smaller receivers, he has not been. He struggled with a guy like Noah Fant. He struggles against some of the bigger tight ends, so that could be something you'd worry about. Ertz is a guy that, and as Brandon just put in the live chat, he's a chain mover, and that's something that kills the Steelers. I mean, those constant first downs. This guy doesn't have to go for 30. He just needs to go for 8 on 3rd and 8. or 3rd and 7. He just needs to move the chains, and that could break the Steelers back. And he's the kind of guy that could do that. Bush is not a he struggles against those taller receivers, those taller tight ends. So that's something that they tried to remedy when they were getting every year they were getting manhandled by Gronk when they played the Patriots. So that's something that they thought they were going to be able to take care of when they drafted Bush. Bush was still a good draft pick. Bush is still going to be the future on that defense. But right now, it's a little bit of a liability when you're talking about covering that big tight end. So even if he's lost a step, he's still going to have some success against the Steelers. And if we were doing a fantasy spotlight here, the one guy on the Eagles that I'm going to go ahead and put my FanDuel money on is probably going to be Zach Ertz.
Right now, Brandon, I'm curious to know your opinion and kind of maybe all kind of Eagles fans' opinion on the Steelers, like offensive skill positions, I should say. Which one of these guys kind of worries you the most? And kind of what kind of position type, like archetype player, is someone that kind of hurts this defense the most?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the Steelers is that it almost reminds me of the 2017 Eagles, where they didn't really have this one dominant, superstar that they kind of fed the offense through. They really spread it around, and ideally, that's what they like to do if they can. I see the Steelers having a similar setup now. It's not just like one guy who really is just the superstar there. It's a lot of different guys. Big Ben can kind of pick and choose where he wants to go with, and that almost works against the Eagles when they go out and they put premium resources into getting Darius Slay, a shutdown corner. I wonder really who's going to cover this week, or even if he's going to follow someone around the formation like he kind of usually does, against these just bona fide number one wide receivers. So definitely interested to see that. I think all those guys can hurt the Eagles. I mean, obviously, Slay has been playing well, so I think whoever he ends up covering will not have the best day. But I mean, the situation there is thin right now, where the Eagles had Jalen Mills starting at safety to begin the year, and they've had to put him back at cornerback now. And now he played well against the 49ers, but I don't think the 49ers really have the best outside wide receivers to challenge him. Mills is definitely susceptible to getting beat deep because he can be a little bit too aggressive on some of those underneath stuff, and he likes to bite on that. So I think if you match him up with speed, maybe it's a Deontay Johnson, maybe, he's getting beat down the field and getting towards a certain point there. So that's definitely something to look out for, just, Mills being a little too bit aggressive. And then another interesting thing here going on at the Eagles secondary, and it's only Wednesday. I don't really know exactly how it's going to play out yet, but Rodney McLeod, Eagles starting safety, free safety, who had a really good game against the 49ers, probably his best in a long time, and he's very active. He was flying around the field. I mean, he's hurt now. He missed practice on Wednesday with a hamstring injury, and the Eagles protected two of their practice squad safeties this week, which kind of tells me that could be an issue, and they might have to call up those young guys to play. So this secondary kind of banged up right now. I think again, anyone basically not covered by Slay might be able to find some success here.
Right now, Brian, the Steelers' kind of receiving core, as Brandon alluded to, has really spread the ball out a lot. A lot of names have featured quite prevalently throughout the early part of the season. But I'm curious to know who's the one kind of Steelers offensive skill player that you kind of want to see a little bit more out of in this game here.
I want to see more out of Juju Smith-Schuster. The benefit that they do have, though, and we saw this 2 weeks ago against the Houston Texans, it was amazing because when Deontay Johnson went down, a lot of people were worried. There's like, oh no, this is going to be a huge chasm for Ben in the passing game. They didn't miss a beat. The primary concern was the fact, is this kid okay? That's really what the concern was, because everybody picked it up. And this is a very unselfish receiving unit. And I talked about it earlier when I was talking about the good old days of Antonio Brown. And good old days, I'm facetious. Let's just say the good old days of Gummy Richards. That's kind of one of our nicknames for Antonio on here. But, what I'm saying here is I want to see Juju break out. And when Juju breaks out, it's kind of infectious. and everybody seems to follow that lead. Of course, we're going to see Eric Ebron get more opportunities. He's opening up a lot of opportunities for the wide receivers as well. And Vance McDonald's very important to this team still, because when they're both on the field, if Ebron's covered, Vance could hurt you. And that's the way it is with all of these receivers. I think these is really one of the best units as far as unselfishness and more opportunities for Ben to thrive.
Right now, one of the names you mentioned, Brian, was Eric Ebron. And I'm curious to know, Brandon, your thoughts on Eric Ebron. Of course, when he first started his career, he was in the Eagles division. He's grown. I would say he's grown a lot as a player. But kind of your thoughts playing against him years prior versus playing him this Sunday.
Yeah, so I mean, the Eagles have struggled with tight ends here. I mean, that was apparent last week when George Kittle went off. Tyler Higbee was a big problem for the Eagles in Week 2 against the Rams. It's an issue. I mean, even Logan Thomas in Week 1, former quarterback, converted into a tight end, has had success against the Eagles. So, and that's a really big concern right now is the Eagles linebackers. They are just not getting it done. There's a guy on the Eagles defense. It's number 47, so keep an eye on that, Steelers fans. You'll probably notice him. His name is Nate Gary, and he is drawing a lot of ire from Eagles fans right now who would like to see him off the team and cut and benched and just anywhere not on the field, because Nate Gary has made some plays in the past. He can be aggressive, but he's also out of position a lot. And Jim Schwartz, the Eagles defensive coordinator, will defend him, but a lot of Eagles fans will not agree with that assessment. And we saw some issues in the 49ers game. There was a play early in the game where their fullback, Kyle Juszczyk, was just like wide open and potentially for a touchdown all the way down, like a 60, 70-yard play. And, Nick Mullins just overthrew it. So the Eagles got bailed out there. So, yeah, that's definitely going to be an issue. Obviously, Ebron has been a monster in the red zone before. What was it, last year, a couple of years ago? He had all those touchdowns. That's definitely going to be a matchup to watch, is how the Eagles linebackers who have been struggling, and they just lost one of their better ones who have been playing well, TJ Edwards, not the best coverage guy in general, but he's done some nice things, and he's obviously better against the run. But yeah, so it's a position group that's a big concern, and I think Steelers fans are going to notice Nate Gary in a good way for Steelers, not so good for the Eagles.
Now, Brian, Gil Brandt earlier today released his kind of top 5 for Defensive Player of the Year rankings. TJ Watt was number 3 on that list. I think a little has to do with some recency bias. Obviously, not playing, loses his league leading sack total. What do you kind of see out of him in this game? He potentially has a big role ahead of him, considering the matchups and injury problems. What do you kind of expect to see out of TJ in this one?
Real quick, I didn't see Brandt's list. I would assume Myles Garrett would be up there.
Who's one? DeForest Buckner was 2 out of Indianapolis. Yeah.
Okay. Really interesting. The 2 very solid players. I think right now, my thought was when Nick Bosa went down, that TJ became a favorite for Defensive Player of the Year. I just really love what he's doing. He is becoming the heart and soul of that defense. And the Steelers are lucky because they've got a few heart and souls of that defense. Cam Hayward being one of them as well. You have the potential in Bush and Fitzpatrick having that role as well. But it's a very strong defense, but it really goes through TJ Watt right now. And we talked about earlier how, if Dupree doesn't kill you, you are going to get mauled by TJ Watt. I am not one to complain about officials very often. I would like to say, though, that against the Houston Texans, Watt could have had a couple more sacks. He was held quite a bit, and they are not calling holding as much this year. In fact, I think the average last year that I read this week was 2.4, and it's about 1.2 holding penalties per game now. So that penalty is not being called as much, but I still think that with the Steelers scheme, with all of those guys coming at you, it's still going to give TJ Watt an opportunity to get to the quarterback if Wentz does not elude them.
Now, Brandon, how is Philadelphia going to kind of defend against TJ? Is this going to be some one-on-one matchups with Lane Johnson? Is this going to be chips from tight ends, or would we see more running backs kind of stepping up to lend a hand? Or how are they defending against TJ?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I mean, part of the lack in production from Zach Ertz, in fairness to him, talking about that earlier, I think has been they're keeping him in more. And now, he's not the best blocking tight end. He's not, anything like a George Kittle again. But I mean, they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to keep guys in because, again, it's Jordan Milada out there on the left side. It is either a hobbled Lane Johnson or a rookie Jack Driscoll on the right side. So yeah, you're going to have to keep a tight end in at times. You're going to have to keep Miles Sanders in at times, and because he's pretty good typically in pass protection, they can kind of count on him there. Or at the very least, he's much better than Corey Clement and Boston Scott, who are the Eagles' backup running backs behind Miles Sanders. So yeah, they're going to have to do everything. And now, again, I think Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles' offensive line coach, has a good track record of kind of figuring this thing out and coming up with good plans for this. So I have some level of confidence they're going to be prepared. But, I mean, you can have all the preparation you want against this number one Steelers pass rush, and it might not be good enough because they're just going to dominate and they're going to win their reps. And I really fear that, Carson Wentz, who has had fumbling issues. I mean, he's fumbled a lot, way too much. Because he likes to stand there back in the pocket, almost like a certain Steelers quarterback kind of likes to do that at times and make things happen. But yeah, so I kind of fear he's going to be holding on to that ball, trying to make a play, especially because the offense might struggle at times to kind of get that big play if they're kind of going to go station to station all game long. And it could be that one time where Wentz tries to hold on, try to extend something, take a shot down the field, and all of a sudden, the ball's coming out of his hands. Someone's, hitting him from behind or maybe from the front. Who knows? But yeah, that's definitely going to be a huge concern. I think for as well as of a plan that the Eagles might be able to draw up, it just might not matter if the Steelers are going to be able to execute.
Now, Brandon, right back to you on this. Fletcher Cox, is he still one of the best defensive linemen in football?
He's certainly being paid like one. I don't think we're seeing enough production in that regard. I don't think he is bad by any means. Don't confuse that. He's definitely not like done or anything, but I don't know that he's elite anymore. And I think Fletcher Cox does a lot of things that don't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, in fairness to him. But when you're playing a player or you're paying a player like the Eagles are with him, where he's like counting for their highest cap hit on the team, $22.8 million, and he's not, giving you the production in addition to the things he's not doing that show up that don't show up on the stat sheet. I mean, like, you need that. And I think he went without even having a single stat of any kind in last week's 49ers game. And now that's not really the biggest issue when the whole defensive line is having success, and maybe he's helping free those other guys up. So you're not really going to kill him for that. But and especially if you win. But, if there's going to be losses here and he's not showing up, I mean, yeah, that makes me wonder. Honestly, if the Eagles things continue to go bad for them, and it could here because they're 1-2-1. They have the Steelers up this week. They have the Ravens up next week. They could easily be 1-4-1 very soon. I mean, Fletcher Cox is a player I would be looking to sell at the trade deadline if they're going to be bad.
I got to say, Brandon, I have flashbacks, and I'm sure Ben has flashbacks to 2016 with Fletcher Cox just destroying him in week 3. Even Brandon Graham, those guys were just killing the Steelers in that game. I'm just thankful that this game is not in Philadelphia, because I don't know if you know this, but the Steelers have not won in the city of brotherly love since 1965.
I do know that. They are perfect 8-0. I do know that stat because I remember that game. I'm sitting there in the press box, and it's part of why I'm wearing the Wawa hat tonight. I said, the Eagles beating the Steelers and just dominating them like that is definitive proof that Wawa is better than Sheets. Sorry to all the people in the comments.
Wow, that's the Vinny Vega bold statement. I tell you what, I'm actually a fan of Wawa. I mean, I live in Maryland, and they're popping up here, but I grew up on Sheets. I grew up in Western PA, so that's like calling my baby ugly.
The fighting word.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Brian, I'm curious to know if you could pluck one person off the Eagles roster and throw him on the Steelers, who's that one player going to be?
Well, as the podcast producer and the producer of Steelers Touchdown Under, it would be Jordan Milada, just to hear our Aussies talk about him all day long, because we lost Jordan Berry, our Australia Australian player. So I don't know, Brandon, I don't know if you know this, but on Saturdays we have Touchdown Under with 2 Australian Steeler fans doing a weekly show. So I'm sure they're going to be loving talking about Milada now playing Australian rugby. But, I digress. I would probably, if I'm plucking a guy off of this roster, I didn't really have time to think about this, but it would probably be Maddox. I would probably take Maddox from the secondary. I know Mike Tomlin was talking about him a good bit in the press conference the other day because he's had experience watching him playing at Pitt and sharing the facility with him. And I really think that he is a dynamic young defender, and I'd probably plug him in. On the offensive side, I'm going to go with the Penn State guy. We just went with a Pitt guy, but Miles Sanders. I would probably bring Miles in.
Brandon, same question you, off the Steelers roster to the Eagles.
Yeah, so I have to take TJ Watt, right?
We're 5 for 5 on that.
Yeah, what's the other answer? I know the Eagles' pass rush is playing well right now, so it's kind of like adding to his strength. But I'll take him, and I love Brandon Graham, and I think Derek Barnett did some good things last week. But I would just figure it out. Get that guy in there, more sacks, just dominate. I think it has to be the answer easily on defense. Offense, I'm thinking about a lot of different directions here. I like Juju, but I also kind of wonder if what Juju is. The production hasn't been there this year. And the Eagles, I don't know that they need another slot guy as much right now as they need speed. So I almost want to say Deontay Johnson here. They definitely need speed. I was thinking about him. I could go with former Eagles offensive tackle. Well, actually, he was a defensive end for them at one point. Alejandro Villanueva. The Eagles definitely could use some help on the offensive line, but Jordan Milada is playing well. In addition to Jordan Milada, by the way, for that podcast you have here, Down Under, the Eagles punter is also an Australian as well. So there you go, Cameron Johnson. You can throw him into the mix. He's doing really well actually this season. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna. So I give you a bunch of names there, but it's TJ Watt in defense, and I guess I'm gonna take Deontay Johnson on offense.
Perfect. Now, Brian, I know we're getting to the top of the hour here. Do you have any questions for Brennan?
Yeah, one thing we talked about 1965. We talked about even the Steelers and the Eagles when they're playing. It seems like it's been even when they're playing in Pittsburgh. I was fortunately at the 2004 game when, in fact, we just talked about that on the Steelers Retro Show the other night. Go ahead and stream that on all your favorite places to download a podcast. The Steelers Retro Show talking about 2004 and the demise of the relationship of Donovan McNabb and 1TO. But my question to you, Brandon, is: do the Eagles kind of look at the Steelers as a little brother in the state of Pennsylvania, because they seem to own them quite a bit?
I always think that's interesting because I think there's like conversations like, is there an Eagles-Steelers rivalry? And to me, there really isn't. I think there is more so for people that live like middle Pennsylvania, like Penn State, like people I know in the Philly area here that went to Penn State, like they kind of can't stay in the Steelers more because they have to deal with, Steelers fans out there in the middle of PA, I guess a little bit more than I would necessarily out here in Philly. So to me, there's never been. I also have family from out west, like Acme, PA, like way out there in Western Pennsylvania. So I've always kind of had like a respect for the Steelers. They're not a team that I think is a rival, and obviously being in a different conference, diffuses things there. But it's interesting though, right? Because you have the Flyers and the Penguins, and obviously I hate the Penguins. That's a big rivalry there. But when it comes to football, it's it's just not the same. I definitely wouldn't say little brother, especially the Steelers having more Super Bowl success by far and everything. But it's interesting, it's interesting that these teams only play every 4 years or so. I'm really disappointed we didn't get the Keystone Bowl back in, what was it, like 2008, when the Eagles, they lost the Cardinals. Yeah, and obviously, the Steelers go on to beat them in that Super Bowl. I think that would have been a really good matchup that year, Eagles-Steelers. That would have been fun to see. We didn't get to see it.
I'm more disappointed about not getting the Keystone Bowl in 2004 because the Steelers lost in that AFC Championship game. So that was a possibility, twice. And ironically, they played each other in both those years.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
How about that? The NFL is moving to a 17-game schedule. I propose that there'd be like a cross-conference kind of local rivalry. Yearly matchup, Pittsburgh-Philadelphia. I would welcome that if that was the 17th game every single year. I would thoroughly enjoy that. As we're getting to the top here, I want to make sure we get to everyone's game predictions on this, their final score prediction. So, Brandon, why don't we start with you on this one? What do you think the final score in this game is going to be?
Yeah, I think this is just a tough spot for the Eagles. I don't think that 49ers game showed them that they're back by any means. The Steelers are 7-point favorites in this one. The Eagles typically do well when they're underdogs and everyone counts them out. So I'd take caution with that, just because when they get to a spot where like no one thinks they can win, that is when they're invincible and they can win somehow. It's just unfortunate they have to dig that hole for themselves all the time. But that aside, I just think the Steelers defense is just going to give this offense that can't score already so many problems. And I think the Steelers offense is just going to be able to do enough, because Big Ben's going to be able to spread the ball around. So I definitely think it's an Eagles loss. And obviously with the bye factor too, the Steelers only have 2 players on IR. The Eagles' whole roster is basically on IR. And if they're not on IR, they're hurt in some other way. So I just think everything is working in Pittsburgh's favor in this game. I will take the Steelers to win by a score of 24-10.
Brian, what are you thinking on this one?
You know what? I'm going to get in trouble for this, because I'm supposed to save the prediction for the Steelers preview tomorrow night and also for the pregame. But I'm going to go ahead and call this a Steelers victory. I'm still cautious about this. There's a little bit of doubt in there, and I worry, because that's just, I'm becoming that pessimistic old guy, the guy waving his fist at clouds. But really what I'm thinking here is I don't think it's going to be the blowout that everybody thinks it's going to be. I think it's going to be a lot closer. The Steelers are not blowing out teams right now. So I'm going to go ahead and say 26-16 in favor of the Steelers.
And myself winding this out, I think I read this morning that the Steelers are one of, if not the only team that hasn't put up 30 points in a game yet this year with scoring up. I think it ends this week. I'm going to go with 31-17, 2-score game in favor of the Steelers. We'll see how it goes. Brandon, as we head out here, do you have anything you want to plug to the people?
Yeah, just check out bleedinggreennation.com. You can follow all the Eagles coverage there. Get familiarized with the Steelers opponent this week. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Gowton. You can also check out National Show on SB Nation. That's the SB Nation NFL Show feed, wherever podcasts are available. I do a podcast on Tuesdays called Off Day Debrief, aka the Oddcast. So national stuff. We talk about the Steelers on there in addition to every other team. So it's fun. So go check that out. And thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Brian, before we head out, do you have anything you want to plug, sir?
Yeah, let's go ahead and check out tomorrow morning the Stat Geek show with co-editor Dave Schofield on the show. Be sure to download this show if you did not catch the beginning of it, because really you don't want to look at these 3 guys while you're driving down the highway. That's just dangerous. So you don't want to do that. But coming up this weekend, lots of great stuff. The Steeler preview tomorrow night on YouTube, then the following day. You could go ahead and download that. As always, check out Jeff Hartman and Let's Ride. That is becoming the morning staple. You have to have that with your Sheets breakfast, not your Wawa coffee, but your Sheets breakfast. Check that out as well. And don't forget about Steelers Brunch with Tony, Touchdown Under, and then next week, the live mic on Tuesdays. I can't forget about that.
Oh, you can't. And make sure you're clicking over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Know Your Enemy for Week 5 for Brandon and Brian. I'm Michael Beck. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.